And welcome one and all to episode 17 of My Life as a Critic. I am professional film critic Sean Patrick, and on this show I look back at reviews that I've written in my nearly 20-year career as a film critic. Well, I mean, not professionally for 20 years. Professionally for the past 5 years, but previously I was an amateur critic online, which there are a lot of those, but I used to write online for a lot of websites, and then I actually got into radio and became a professional critic on the radio as opposed to in writing. Though my writing, not bad. I was never a bad writer. Strong opinions, good spelling, punctuation, strong. Always knew the difference between, which version of it's to use. Today on the show, talking about the movie A View from the Top, or rather just View from the Top, starring Gwyneth Paltrow from 2003. A review that I wrote for the website Bickit.com. As always, I'll spell it Bikkit because I really don't want first-time listeners to hear me say that and wonder why I wrote for Bigot.com. Bickit.com. No longer in existence. You can find it via archive.org if you, for some reason, want to do that. But I will read the review for verbatim, and then I'll watch the movie and see if my review has changed anything, and and if anything, if I've changed at all since I wrote the review. This movie, View from the Top, is an odd film. It's one of the few movies in history to have been affected by September 11th. It was bumped from its December 2001 release to a March of 2003 release because they didn't want to release a movie set on, that was set essentially on a bunch of planes so soon after 9/11. It was set, like I said, it was set to come out in December of 2001, 3 months after September 11th, and they decided that a film about stewardesses was not something that was going to be successful at that time, so they bumped it. The content has absolutely nothing to do with it. There's talk of plane crashes. There's a really ridiculously terrible moment in the credits with Mike Myers doing some weird bit that I'm sure prior to September 11th might have been funny if you're a fan of Mike Myers, but after September 11th obviously wasn't funny. But other than that, there was no real... I guess there was enough reason to move it. Why they had to wait till nearly 2 years later, I don't know, but it made sense. Looking back on it, it makes sense that they had to move it. Because people probably weren't going to go see it. It was more of a business decision than it was any kind of moral thing. They weren't concerned about whether or not the public would be offended by seeing a movie that's set on airplanes in the wake of 9/11. They were concerned that no one was going to see it because of that, because people weren't ready to go back to flying yet. But this is a weird movie because it's just a modest little character piece, kind of romantic comedy, sort of. It shouldn't have been affected by September 11th, yet it was. So here's my original review from back in 2003 for Bickit.com. Of the many odd ripples from our country's greatest tragedy, none seems less important than its effects on Hollywood movies. It's an effect still felt today as films that were made around the time of 9/11 finally reached theaters. One of the films shelved after September 11th was the flight attendant comedy View from the Top. One is left to wonder what kind of movie View was when it was conceived and what it became after the tragedy. Suddenly, jokes involving air travel simply aren't funny, and as a filmmaker, you have sensitivities to care about that never existed before. It must have been excruciating for such a light comedy to have that mantle to bear, and it's one that likely ruined any chance the film had of being a hit. View from the Top stars Gwyneth Paltrow as Donna Jensen, the daughter of a Vegas go-go dancer and an alcoholic father. Donna, living in a trailer with her well-past-her prime mom, desperately wants out of the trailer and thinks she has a way with a new boyfriend. Unfortunately, like everything else in her life, the boyfriend, played in a cameo by Buffy's Mark Blucas, let her down and dumps her on her birthday. Nevertheless, Donna's pluckiness and spirit lead her to another opportunity to better herself. After seeing a woman on TV talk about the wonders of being a flight attendant, Donna sets out to travel the world. Of course, at first she has to settle for the Laughlin to Fresno route of an economy airline that specializes in drunk gamblers, but hey, everyone has to start somewhere. Along the way, Donna makes friends with her flight attendant mentor, played by Kelly Preston, and another trainee, played by Christina Applegate. She also makes a new love connection with a struggling law student played by Mark Ruffalo. Donna doesn't have time for the relationship, though, and she and her friends fight their way into another airline, the high-class Royalty Airlines. Here, Donna actually meets the woman who inspired her to become a flight attendant, played by Candice Bergen. In addition, Donna becomes the star pupil of a flight attendant teacher, played by Mike Myers. Though Donna seems destined for the big-time international first class to Paris, she somehow fails and ends up doing commuter flights out of Cleveland. It's not all bad, though, as while stationed in Cleveland, she reunites with the law student, and they begin a tentative romance. However, it is then that Donna does get her international route and must choose between career and personal life. On the surface, View from the Top seems pretty straightforward, but upon watching it, you see it become quite confused. Director Bruno Barreto never settles on a tone for the film. Early scenes of Paltrow's Donna living in squalor seem like a Jerry Springer satire. Then as Donna becomes more sophisticated and grown up, something Paltrow is good at projecting, she's confronted by characters that seem in an entirely different film. Well, somewhere toward the middle of the film, Paltrow and Candice Bergen seem to channel the elegant humor of an Audrey Hepburn movie. Mike Myers is doing Jerry Lewis, and Christine Applegate seems a refugee from the aforementioned Springer show. Mark Ruffalo seems to fit somewhere in the middle, seeming capable of fitting either tone if given the proper direction. Again, I wonder how much the film changed after 9/11. It was always a comedy, but how much of the humor or even the story was forced to change for the sake of sensitivity? Is it possible that a more coherent version of the film existed before? I doubt it. As it is, A View from the Top is yet another line on Gwyneth Paltrow's resume. While not great, it does note her amazing range. If given the chance, I'm sure she could have made one of the two movies in View from the Top work. And that is my review of View from the Top. Not terrible, not great. A lot of confused ideas there, especially in the final paragraphs. I was trying to get to the point that I felt it was two different movies, because there's one movie going on that's kind of really screwballing over the top, and there's another more elegant version of this that I think Gwyneth Paltrow probably wanted to make. But I probably know more once I actually watch the movie, which is available on Netflix. If you want to join me and watch it now, I'm going to watch the movie and then we'll talk about it again. For you, no time's going to pass. For me, I'm actually going to watch the movie now. Well, upon watching this, I can't imagine that September 11th could have affected this movie in any way. I mean, it's a mess, don't get me wrong, but I can't imagine they had to change much based off of this. This is just a really straightforward sort of character story. I mean, I want to call it a romantic comedy, but Mark Ruffalo is not really in the movie all that much. It's rather arbitrary, really, that she chooses that life over being a flight attendant. The romance is sort of secondary to her career journey and her personal journey in the film. And I can't imagine, I mean, there are no jokes about plane crashes. There are a couple of moments where she, like the first time she's on a plane, she freaks out really bad and starts yelling about the plane crashing or whatever. But I doubt this was anything that had to do with 9/11. It was just a simple fact that people weren't interested in movies about planes in December of 2001, and that's why they moved this movie. I doubt they made any changes to it. Certainly, I mean, there are two movies going on during this film. That's true. The first half of the film is just an absolute abysmal mess, where you've got absolutely no idea what the time frame of the film is. I have no idea when this film is set. Is it set during this day and age, or is it set during the 70s? The plane that she starts off on the first time seems like a commuter plane that could have only existed in the 1970s. But then when you get to her time in Cleveland and she's with Mark Ruffalo, it seems like it's set in 2003, which is very confusing. And the soundtrack doesn't help. I mean, the soundtrack is bouncing everywhere from Journey's Don't Stop Believing to a constant refrain of time after time underneath certain scenes for whatever reason. And there's even Up and Away from who is that? Who sings that? The Association. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Up and Away, that classic '60s song is thrown in there. The soundtrack is just confusing, but everything about this movie is really confusing. What anybody thought they were doing, especially like I said in the first half of the film, you've got Gwyneth Paltrow, who's at the time she made this, she was 30 years old, and apparently still, according to this timeline of this film, she was still living with her mother in a trailer and kind of working at a big box store with the boyfriend until he dumps her, and then that's when she finally moves on and becomes a flight attendant. Whole lot of unnecessary garbage there. They could have just, jumped to her wanting to be a flight attendant. I mean, you could have just cut out the whole backstory of the character could go. Really, if you want to make this movie work. But it's only 89 minutes as it is. So I guess they felt like they needed the padding of that. There's going to be more padding throughout this. We'll get to that in a moment when we talk about Mike Myers. But you could cut out her entire backstory, the trailer park and living in Nevada. You could just have her as a kid, like, see a flight attendant and see how pretty flight attendants are in their uniforms and come to admire that. Then as a teenager, she sees the interview with Candice Bergen and buys her book, and then finally graduates from high school and decides, okay, now I'm going to be a flight attendant. Of course, then you couldn't have Gwyneth Paltrow in the movie. You'd have to have a much younger actress, but but that would still be much more concise filmmaking than what you get with this awful thing set in the trailer park where she's really just playing this really condescending character where it's just Gwyneth Paltrow pretending to be really dumb, uneducated, and just insulting. Like, she watched a couple episodes maybe of a Jerry Springer show, which I mentioned Jerry Springer a lot in my review. The caricature that she does there is really ugly. It really is. It's kind of that modern conception of an out of touch rich person trying to pretend to be poor, or to emulate what it's like to be an uneducated poor person. It's really an insulting performance, and Christina Applegate kind of gives the same performance as Gwyneth Paltrow as well. It's really terrible, and it really gets even worse when you get to the second half of the film and you see Gwyneth Paltrow just kind of being Gwyneth Paltrow. She's a grown up and being mature and acting her age and not trying to pretend to be stupid anymore. And it's just like watching Gwyneth Paltrow, and you're actually watching the kind of movie that you kind of want to be watching when you're watching a Gwyneth Paltrow movie, which is kind of sophisticated, kind of light and funny, kind of Audrey Hepburn-esque. That's the kind of movie that you want to see Gwyneth Paltrow make, as opposed to the first half of the film, which is just this mean-spirited caricature of poor people, which is really, truly how it comes off. Mike Myers, of course, is in this movie, and I mentioned it before, and I was talking about padding. Mike Myers, I don't know what it is about him when he plays a secondary character in a movie, whether even we're talking Inglourious Bastards or 54, or just any movie where he's not the lead. He feels like he has to do a bit of business on the side in order to, to stand out, because he can't be the least standout person in any scene. So in this movie, he's got like an eye thing, like there's something wrong. One of his eyes is pointed in the wrong direction, and it's part of the character because it's part of the reason why he couldn't be a flight attendant himself and had to be a flight attendant trainer, is because of his eyes. But really, the whole point of it is just Mike Myers wanted a bit of business to do. If he was going to play this character, he had to have a bit of business he could do. So he needed googly eyes. And that would allow him to stand out from everybody else in the scene. Never mind if it served the character. Never mind if it served any kind of comic purpose. It doesn't. Thankfully, it does. I mean, it's insulting to anybody who might have crossed eyes. The way he plays it, it's insulting. But he just needs a bit of business to do. In Inglourious Bastards, he's got that ridiculous-looking hair and makeup job. 54, he's all over the place in terms of his energy and that ridiculous hair. It's anytime he's not the focus, he has to pull focus to him. And it really doesn't serve this film well at all when he's on screen, because all he's doing is pulling focus. And you can sense the moments where he's done bits, and like he's like when he's intentionally forgetting people's names, or just anything he can do to call attention to the bit of business that he's doing in order to get the attention. Because I don't know, maybe he doesn't think a scene is funny enough, so he's got to do something to make it funny. Or maybe, like I said, they need a lot of filler in this movie, so they probably left in a few of his ad-libs just to pad out the runtime of the movie. Because it's extraordinarily short at 89 minutes, and It's got a lot of filler in it. A lot of filler, and a lot of it is Mike Myers just doing a bit of business here and there. It's really distracting, and a really, really terrible performance. Really, really terrible. Mark Ruffalo is in this movie, though you'd barely know it. And his function in the film is bizarre as well, or at least the way he's employed throughout the film. We meet him while she's living in Nevada and working for the commuter airline. He's a lifeguard at a lake, I guess, or a lake police. But he was a law student, he dropped out. Then he decides to go back to law school, and without any kind of explanation, he just happens to be in Cleveland when she gets accidentally assigned to Cleveland, even though she was the best in her class. She ends up getting assigned to the lowest rung of the ladder of this new airline, Royalty Airlines, that she goes to work for, and she ends up working in the lowest level, which is Cleveland, for whatever reason. I guess, fuck you, Cleveland, I guess. I don't know. They don't like Cleveland. But he just happens to be there. They don't explain it. They don't lay in that his family lives there at any point earlier in the film or when they first meet and go on their first date while they're in Nevada. They never explain how he gets from Nevada to Cleveland. They just put his family there and, hey, I'm here. Oh, and hey, you're here. What luck. But they do have some chemistry. I mean, they're both really good actors, Mark Ruffalo and Gwyneth Paltrow, so it's kind of hard for them not to spark off of each other, but they're not given any time. Their entire relationship happens in about a 5-minute montage. We got a couple minutes, obviously, with the first date early in the film, but then in the second half of the film, it's basically this 5 or 6 minute montage of their entire relationship. One big scene with her meeting his family, and then she decides to go back and retest and get her big time flight, which she wants to become the New York to Paris flight attendant. That's her goal. She wants New York to Paris. That's the big time for flight attendants. By the way, the way this film treats flight attendants, like Candice Bergen's character is said to be like the world's most famous flight attendant, because I guess that's a thing. Nothing against flight attendants. I don't want to insult flight attendants, but is there a world's most is there a celebrity flight attendant that I'm not aware of? Other than that guy who, the guy who kicked people off the plane or whatever it was a couple years ago. Are there celebrity flight attendants? Flight attendant would seem to be a pretty wonderful job if you like to travel, and I'm sure it's a great job with great benefits. But the way it's treated here, it's a rock star kind of celebrity job, is really condescending toward the profession itself, and the people who do it. I could see, I feel like I've seen in other movies where a character would see the ideal of their profession and go, I wish I could do that, or the ideal of a profession, and see that, like flight attendants in their uniforms, looking beautiful, having a kind of a glamorous life of travel. I could see that. I could see wanting to emulate that. I could see a young girl being influenced by that and wanting to be that. I could see that. But the way they treat it here, they treat it like she's going to become like a major celebrity of some sort. And she's a flight attendant. It makes everything seem silly. It makes everything seem outsized. It makes it seem like her dream is kind of a joke. When they could have been something, you could establish that in a far more effective way, and they treat it like a joke, and it takes away from her profession, her character, and the movie. That is just something that keeps happening throughout this. The director is a guy named Bruno Barreto, who mostly he works in South America, so maybe it's just a translation thing, like he doesn't quite understand how to make American movies and deal with American actors. I'm not sure. I don't want to try and put myself in his head. I don't know him, but there's a certain, you can sense where he was kind of bullied by Mike Myers, obviously, where Mike Myers is just doing his own thing. You can sense where kind of Gwyneth Paltrow, where in the second half of the film, where he seems to be making the movie that he wants to make, which is a kind of more elegant romantic comedy with Candice Bergen, Gwyneth Paltrow, Mark Ruffalo, actually turning their characters from caricatures into believable characters. And the movie, it's frustrating because the movie actually gets good in like the final 10 minutes. It actually gets to be something that you kind of root for in the final 10 or 15 minutes. Up until then, it's just this mess, and it's aggravating. I sense that maybe he was kind of stuck with the parody first half, or the caricatures, these outsized poor people caricatures that he's got in the first half. And then he's kind of making the movie that he wants to make in the second half, because that's actually a pretty good movie that gets sort of underway for a little bit, a couple scenes. Even the montage isn't half bad. It's just rushed because it's a montage and it's the entire relationship between our romantic leads. There's just a far better way to make this movie than what they did. And that soundtrack. Oh, brutal. Like I said, I still don't know what time period the film is set in because of that soundtrack and because of the set design too. I mean, like I said, the everything set in Las Vegas seems like it's set in the 1970s, and then everything else seems like it's set in 2003. It makes no sense. The song choices, just disorienting. They make no sense. Don't Stop Believing is that the opening and the closing of the film is not even Journey's Don't Stop Believing. It's this really crappy version of Don't Stop. Why is that there? I don't know. I could go into a whole thing about her character and the choices that she makes, and deciding that being with a man is more important than her career. But I don't think this film has that kind of intent. I don't think this film was made with that level of malice toward a woman having a dream or a goal or a job. I think it's just more inept than it is, or absent-minded than it is in any way intentionally anti-feminist. But she does make that decision, though. She does choose a man over her career, this career that she seems to treasure. She does seem to make that choice. But I think that's just more of a function of wanting. I think the audience, we in the audience, want her and Mark Ruffalo together. Granted, we're not given any other options in her life. I mean, she has no other people in her life. This is a bizarre character who, yes, granted, she doesn't spend much time in one place. She's flying around the country. She's flying from New York to Geneva, New York to Paris, New York to everywhere. You know, she's very busy. She's on the go, so she doesn't have many friends. Her family's back in Las Vegas. She's not close to them. So it makes sense that she hasn't connected with anybody else, but there's no other men who would find Gwyneth Paltrow attractive? In this time, no other man has come up to her in an airport and tried to hit on her? We're given no other options. Rob Lowe's in this movie. They didn't bother to use him at all for anything. He shows up for a couple scenes and is completely ineffectual and then is gone. He has no effect whatsoever other than a brief Gwyneth Paltrow pep talk, and then he's out the door. Could have used him, maybe. They could have brought him back around. That would have worked. Bring Rob Lowe back around later in the movie. Give her an option. Extend the film that way instead of all that Mike Myers business. I keep imagining the better film this could have been. I feel like I could have made this movie so much better. I think because I could have, frankly. Just saying. But that's View from the Top, and this has been My Life as a Critic. I hope you've found this entertaining, this kind of extemporaneous chat about a rather random movie, A View from the Top, which, again, if you want to watch it, it is available on Netflix. You can take a look at it for yourself, and you're more than welcome to argue any points that I've made here. We'll be back again with another episode soon, so thank you very much.